SEO is not just about keyword research and rankings. At the end of the day, our objective is to add value to the business, and we should view our work as a revenue driver. Yet, in today's landscape, SEO teams are still being siloed, undervalued, or misaligned with the broader business goals. With the rise of LLMs and AI search, there's a groundswell of interest in our industry. According to SEMrush's online search after ChatGPT, 1 in 10 US internet users are now turning to generative AI first for their online search. This shows a significant shift in user behavior, and upper management is taking notice. So how do we reframe SEO as a revenue driver, and how should teams adapt with this new AI search landscape? This is the Voice of Search podcast. My name is Tyson, and joining us today is Travis Tallent, Managing Director at Brainlabs. Travis is here to help us break down why SEO is far more than just keyword rankings and how AI and omnichannel thinking are reshaping the game. Travis, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
I mentioned this kind of beforehand. I felt like we were kind of orbiting a little bit within the industry, where I kept seeing your name. I always saw kind of tied to different hiring piece, and then we finally got connected through Noah and Nick in the SEO community, and so it's great to finally have you here on the podcast.
Absolutely, yeah, and same. I've only ever heard great things about this guy named Tyson, and now that we've had a bit to chat, I can absolutely see why your reputation precedes you.
Yeah, it's nice when you see someone, you're like, oh, okay, I see a lot of similarities and things, and then you finally get a chance to chat, and you're like, okay, yeah, cool, we're on the same page. But so today, we're talking about, I think, first and foremost, how SEO and our profession, as practitioners, is it's more of a revenue driver, and maybe and this is something I too feel as an industry, maybe we didn't embrace enough in kind of the early days, and it almost feels like we're still trying to kind of claw our way out of it. But maybe to level set with the listeners, can you kind of, in your own perspective, how do you view search, and why do you see this as a revenue driver within the business, rather than just kind of a discipline that sits in the corner?
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at most brands' analytics, you will quickly see that SEO tends to be the most efficient and best ROI channel out of any of the other digital marketing channels. And to your point, for a long time, people didn't acknowledge the power that SEO can ultimately yield. From both a brand perspective, there are lots of things we can do in terms of brand safety, in terms of brand experience within the SERPs and on the website. But on the flip side, SEO can also lead to discovery. And I think that's where most SEO spent their time, really with this vision that if we drive more traffic, no matter if the topics are related to the brand or not, that will somehow have some benefit to introducing that person to the brand. The reality is, Google wants to show the most relevant website in any particular search. And I think that is also true for any search engine out there, because otherwise they won't be seen as useful and people won't use their product. And so today we live in a world where we do have AIOs taking a chunk out of traffic. I'm sure we've all seen loads on our LinkedIn profiles about how traffic is declining, but business is okay. And conversions are still coming through. Revenue is still coming through. And so I think we're really at a catalyst where now we have data to prove SEO has always kind of been more focused as the revenue driver and more focused as the conversion leader. And then, that's really where you have to start critically questioning what tactics fall under SEO. Why is CRO not incorporated in an SEO's roadmap? Why is UX design and user experience on a website not incorporated in an SEO's roadmap? And I think that's where it gets really interesting, because that's the fun part. That's where you can really squeeze a lot of juice out of the orange, if you will, in this day and age.
And so I guess like on that last piece, I feel like there's conflicting signals like in the industry where, you know, at its core as SEOs, like we rely on the collaboration and working with these other teams, whether it's product and engineering, content, marketing. I mean, you called out UX, CRO, like all those kind of areas. But yet in some ways I feel like, and it's not universal, but maybe not as much as I would like, it feels like SEO has been very siloed. And it's like, despite having this like dependency, it's like they're more often than not, the paid team and the SEO team's not collaborating together. Like everyone's kind of fighting for their own initiatives rather than having like more of this collaborative session. Like how do you feel like as an industry we can help to kind of further break down some of those barriers?
Yeah, SEO is absolutely a team sport, and I think a lot of other channels don't necessarily have to be, right? So like paid search can stand up and launch all by itself. It, you know, as long as it gets marketing buy-in, brand marketing buy-in, etc., they can go spin up ads without working with anyone else. SEO can't operate in that way, and I think the best way to get stakeholder buy-in is to really focus on the systems and the process that really enable all of those gears to operate together. And the way to do that exceptionally well is to understand what are each of these teams' KPIs, what are their own goals, and then align your work and your roadmap to their KPIs and their goals. So development teams, their KPIs are typically like, site speed and how often is the site up, or sometimes they'll be conversion driven. What's the conversion rate? How quickly are people converting? And all of those things are relevant to SEO, and the missing piece is people tying those KPIs and really understanding what is everyone bonused on? What does everyone care about? And the way we do that at Brainlabs is through our quarterly SEO road mapping process, where step number one is to go through an opportunity analysis and identify what are the biggest impact initiatives. You bring those to relevant stakeholders, say head of engineering, head of brand marketing, content, etc., and you hear from them what are their priorities, what are their resources, and then you build your SEO roadmap. So you're incorporating them in the process before you build this roadmap. So then we shift from being a siloed team saying, hey, you need to do this, to, okay, how do we do this together and what's realistic? And then step number 4 is execution. And then how this turns into a flywheel is measurement, by analyzing how are the optimized sections or pages of the site performing against the unoptimized sections and pages of the site. And when you do that, it becomes very clear, A, the value of SEO's work, but the value of everyone else's input in that work, so that you have shared wins, and that allows you to build those stepping stones for easier approvals through stakeholders in the future.
Now, jumping back just a little bit there, and I think you said it was like step 4, where you're kind of like, you've already made your identification of like, you know, what the big rocks are that are going to have, you know, in your mind, like largest impact. When you're approaching those other teams, can you kind of like dig in a little more into like how you're presenting that? Like, are you first trying to get the other teams to open up and share what's on their roadmap so then you can kind of dovetail into that? Or are you kind of approaching it more as like a pitch of like, hey, can I win you over on what I'm trying to push?
Yeah, I think every team is going to require a slightly different approach. I will say I consider one of my superpowers asking questions. And as a kid, that got me in trouble a lot. But in my role today, it's really, really effective. So my approach is I typically present the opportunity that I see. Say that is something along the lines of your schema on the website is a mess. We forecast what the impact of that is going to be. And there are tons of case studies out there that show, when you implement schema, this is the impact. But you can even take it one step further to say, if this is a large enterprise brand that wants to decrease the amount of phone calls coming into the call center, you can say, hey, by improving schema, you can go down the path of what is that impact going to be to answering people's questions in the SERP on the website where they don't ever have to call that call center. And even if that is a marginal impact, say 10% less phone calls to the call center, then you can quantify that. And that's where you start by asking questions of, okay, what is the cost of one phone call to the call center? And that's where you can incorporate the other team's input to really kind of build this story and understand what matters to them, what their goals are, so you can align your roadmap with what ultimately matters. I think I can't tell you how many times I've seen SEOs be really, really stubborn and firm in we have to do X, Y, Z. This is the only way we're going to see success. And the reality is the only way we're going to see success is stuff that gets implemented. So focus on the things that are going to get implemented. Stop trying to fight the upstream battle, and the easiest way to focus on things that are going to get implemented is to understand what's already on other people's roadmaps, what matters to them.
That's such a important kind of piece that I just want to like double down on, because I feel like I've, came across some SEOs that are just unbelievably bright, super, super sharp, but it's like they seem to kind of struggle with the actual like implementation side. And it's like there's almost an entire skill set or a game that goes into the how do you win buy-in, how do you kind of do that. And I think the piece there that you mentioned on like, hey, it's only as good as it's been implemented. And you can do the best tech SEO audit in the world, but if nothing gets implemented, at the end of the day, it's like what value did that work really produce? And I think another area that oftentimes I find that SEOs, like we tend to feel uncomfortable and, sometimes it almost like people like shy away from is the forecasting aspect. And so through like your description there, you were implying and hitting on like building forecasts, building impact pieces. And it's like, I think that's such a critical tool to get that buy-in and to show that your work is going to align to the other team's goals. Like what recommendations would you have for SEOs that are maybe like, let's say in their head too much, where it's like, but there could be an algorithm update and there's all these things that maybe I can't control. Like, what advice do you have to kind of like give a little more peace of mind? Yeah,
any forecast is going to have caveats, even business forecast. So as companies give expected earnings and all of that, no one predicts a pandemic. No one predicts an economic downturn. No one predicts the CEO having a scandal and getting fired, right? Like, those are all things that are outside of any business forecast control. It's the same thing in the SEO world, just dependent on algorithms and, the evolving consumer search journey and audiences and all of that jazz. So any forecast is, of course, not a guarantee of results, but it's a good relative sizing opportunity. And that's how it should be presented, is these are the relative results compared for each of these initiatives, right? So if we identify a topic that the website is not going after that we think they have a right to rank for, then, and we do that for 10 topics, going through a forecasting exercise then allows us to say, okay, which of those topics should we prioritize? And which of these is the juice ultimately worth the squeeze? So yeah, I think it's really important to get out of your head. I think it's also really important to be very clear with any stakeholders you're presenting to. It's a relative forecasting exercise. It's not an absolute or guaranteed. And also frame it in the analogy and context of business forecasting. There will always be caveats, and it's important for us to focus on what we can control.
Such good advice. And I think too, like, most executives are familiar and are aware that assumptions are being made in any forecasts. I think it's more important to highlight your logic, to be like, yeah, no, we didn't just make this up. Like, there was thought that goes into it. And it's like, sometimes, yeah, you might get kind of like pressured on like specific assumptions, but I think more often than not, like, people just want to see that it was thought through, and knowing that everything's not going to be in a vacuum and you're not going to be able to control every aspect, but it's more of like, okay, you use sound logic for this. And then the other piece that I love doing too is throwing out, like, kind of, especially if someone feels really uncomfortable with it, give like a best case, worst case, like, hey, this is what, if we do nothing, this is like a conservative estimate, this is like the best case scenario, you know, whether you get all the resource requests that you wanted or whatever it is. But sometimes that, I think, can maybe help people feel just a little more like, I might be wrong on this. But at the end of the day, it's like every business, like, discipline is making these assumptions. And even the paid team, who has a lot of control, has to also make assumptions. Like, years back when all of a sudden Amazon jumped into running PLA ads, it's like, well, that blew up everyone's budget just overnight. And even that is such a controlled, like, discipline in its own right.
Yes.
But kind of switching over, so you called out earlier, and I want to double back to, like, CRO, because I feel like, you know, as SEOs, we've talked about, you know, product-led SEO, the, like, you know, the marketing alignment, analytics, product, as I feel like those are at this point like the more traditional aspects. And I think CRO is like a really interesting one that you've, you know, in previous conversations too, you've called out. So like, maybe if you could kind of share to the listeners, like, how are you viewing like that aspect, and like, why do you feel like it's so critical for SEOs to embrace it?
In my mind, the purpose of a website is changing. It's changing from being an informational journey library, if you will, for users, to more of an action-oriented, purpose-driven site. And that means that you need to focus on how are people ultimately navigating the content, the pages, the experience, the flow on the website in a much more critical way than before, where it was, we just want, I think a lot of SEO's ambitions was, we just want them to land on the page. Once they get to the site, we don't really care. Like, it's out of our hands. It's in someone else's wheelhouse. And I think that is a very short-sighted view of the value and work that we do. Of course, if you're just viewing keyword research as, I'm going to look at the search volume and determine what to go after, that's not a very compelling strategy. But if you say, I want to take the keyword research, blend that over with the consumer search journey, blend that with audience personas, blend that with existing content on the site versus net new content on the site, then all of a sudden, there's a very easy spot where CRO ultimately plays, which is, hey, we have an upper funnel page for this particular audience, but we don't have a middle or lower funnel or loyalty page for this particular audience. let's work on that and let's build that into our roadmap. Now, the other thing I'll say is there's been a lot of bad CRO out there in the world, so much so where I would assert that's part of why AI search engines are seeing the uprise and surge that they are today. When you go to certain websites, you're just bombarded with pop-ups and with like awful email captures and exit intent pop-ups, and it's a miserable experience. And that's why AI search is even possible, because people want simplicity. And when I say CRO, I'm not just saying let's focus on the very bottom of the funnel conversion for, to capture that first party data or that revenue. That's not good CRO. When I say CRO, I'm saying, how do you build loyalty? How do you focus on the lifetime value of that customer so they come back over and over and over, and you become the brand that they go to for whatever is relevant to you and they're ultimately searching for. That is what good CRO is. And that is what good SEO is, when you're focused on the audience, not the keyword.
And it's like when you phrase it like that too, it seems like it's so obvious that it's like almost shocking of why hasn't this been more of a focus? Because it's like, we've heard for, I don't even know how many years now, it's like SEO, you're targeting the user, not the search engine. And it's kind of like, you throw out like the Wayne Gretzky quote, where it's like, I feel like it is a very kind of like obvious element, but it is something that I don't think maybe as an industry that we've embraced fully. And I think it also ties back to kind of where we started the conversation of like SEO being a revenue driver, is it's like without that element, how are you actually achieving it? And it's like, and then you're falling down that same kind of, in some ways like trap of talking about keyword rankings and things like that. It's like, I feel like we've maybe unfortunately conditioned some executives to be asking about rankings and, particular keyword performance. But I don't believe at the end of the day any executive is really that interested in keyword positions and like keyword rankings. No. And it's like, and if they have, I feel like it's like they've probably been fed that like too many times, so it feels normal. So I don't know. It's an interesting kind of like element that I feel like we kind of, maybe as an industry overlooked quite a bit.
Yeah, well, and the other thing I'll say for the SEOs out there who are like, no, like, I only want to focus on stuff that impacts my KPIs in SEO. We know from the Google DOJ trials that site engagement impacts rankings. So if that's not convincing, if going after the audience and lifetime value of a customer isn't convincing enough, then just know that focusing on the user experience and improving site engagement metrics and your website does impact SEO rankings, and that was proven in the Google DOJ trial. So there's so much to say. It can and should absolutely be a part of the strategy. I will say it's not easy. You're adding, one more element, one more team, maybe even a few more teams if you're in a large org where UX design and development or whatever else are all separated. But it's worthwhile. And I think the best SEOs out there are the best quarterbacks. They're the best team players. And I think embracing that as a part of your job is basically going to be how you future-proof your job. Because if you're just focusing on content or just focusing on keyword research or the very basic elements of SEO, AI is going to replace you. It might not be a year from now, but it'll definitely be 5 years from now. And so the more you can integrate your role into the other teams and be that quarterback, the more future-proof your job will be from this emerging technology.
Absolutely. And maybe like with that, so I feel like Obviously, we need to talk AI search. Can't really get through a conversation without it. But to me, I do feel like it's an opportunity. And it's like you hear some people where there's almost like a nervousness of like, it's like our job going to become obsolete. But it's like there's so much interest and awareness from like the general public. Like I have friends of mine that have no idea what I actually do for a living. I mean, they know like kind of, but it's like I'm actually having conversations about my work of people that would have never talked about it before. And I think
Yeah.
like you have the ears right now of higher ups, executives, like we're kind of, I think we have this opportunity to take advantage. Like what advice would you kind of give, whether it's, someone on the agency side or in-house, like how to better position, within this kind of like groundswell that's going on? Like how can we take advantage of this better?
I think number one is having a really firm grasp on how how it works. It's really difficult to be an SEO without understanding how a search engine works. And I agree the same with LLMs, and I agree the same with AIOs. And some of that is in a black box, but it's also, not. There's been a lot of documentation on how these things are trained and how they work and all of that jazz. So that's number one. And being able to simply explain that to a stakeholder is essential, because when you do that, I think they will quickly realize, oh, so I need to make sure that my website can be crawled. I need to make sure I have content that provides context to any of these models or to a user. And I need to make sure that my brand is well positioned in the market. Well, that sounds a lot like SEO. And when you explain it in that way, then all of a sudden it positions your team as the SEO team to help be the heroes and the problem solvers in this new world as well. So that's number one. I think number two is also leading with data. This is easier now, today, than it was a year ago when there wasn't much available data out there, and it seemed like everyone I was talking to was saying ChatGPT had way more traffic and way more interest than we know it actually does today. Don't get me wrong, ChatGPT is taking a small slice of the search market. Today, that stands at 0.26% of the search engine market. Google is still king. And I think with Google launching AIOs, with Google launching AI mode, which is in beta today and will obviously roll out, I think the world that we're looking at is the vast majority of people will still use Google. And we know Google is using the foundations of SEO and SEO inner workings to help feed any of these LLMs and how they ultimately operate. So leading with data to say, hey, don't throw all your eggs in the ChatGPT basket, and really still focus on where your audience is going to be crucial. The very last thing I'll say here is the way people are searching is changing. We're seeing younger generations use video platforms like Instagram and TikTok far more than we ever have. I think YouTube and Reddit are seeing the limelight like they've never had before within Google itself. And so that is driving a lot of interest. All this to say, the winning brands out there are the ones that are doing what any good brand has always done, which is have an omni-channel, multimedia, multimodal approach to your strategy. Again, it's difficult, it's expensive, but I also know companies that spend 100 times more on paid search than they do on SEO. And I think rather than feeding the cash machine of these big tech companies, invest in your brand with better site experience, better content, better videos, and that will undoubtedly benefit and make any other paid media investment that much more efficient and effective and valuable. And that's the story that we're leading with today, and it's working. And many brands are bought into that story in this AI world.
Yeah, it's like the quick sugar fix is not always like the best cornerstone of a good diet.
Yeah,
And if you're like
right.
too fixated on it, I mean, sure, there's always times and places for it. Do you see, like, would you predict that we're gonna see like that's starting to evolve and kind of change more, or like, do you feel like we're gonna kind of stay in kind of this similar, like, yeah, paid search is gonna get the lion's share of budget, and we're gonna kind of pick up the scraps on the side? Like, how do you think it's gonna kind of play out over the next few years?
Yeah, these these tech companies are really great salespeople, and they have black box data that they share to potential clients to get more investment. So they will always have the advantage when it comes to forecasting, when it comes to competitive analysis, etc., than an SEO does. So I think for that and that reason alone, there's still going to be massive investment in paid media. I do think that companies are becoming more critical of it. We have many clients that are viewing holistic search, blending paid search and SEO strategy together, less as this is another lever for optimization, and more as this is table stakes. And we need to make sure that our investments are worthwhile. We also have clients that are really being critical on even TV investments and radio investments, and asking SEO teams, hey, when we ran a Super Bowl ad, what was the impact on search? Did more people go search our brand name? Did more people go to our website, right? And like, I think that's the lens. That's the lens every CMO should have, and that's the seat and the table every SEO should be at, because we do have access to data and insights that can help feed an entire an entire integrated marketing strategy. So to your point, I would stop focusing on the sugar fix, and I would start focusing on the exercise regimen. And how can we be a cornerstone during every part of that exercise regimen? We're not always the solution, but we do have really valuable inputs into each of those solutions.
And I love that call out that you made, and I feel like it brings it back to kind of some of the earlier points in the conversation where being that like kind of team player and like building those relationships with other departments and other things, we have so much to offer, even not necessarily in the situations of there's something for us to gain, but like the call out that you made on like being able to measure impact of like general TV ads and like what's the brand, that's the strength of our brand. It's like we have so much data that we can provide that's outside of just a sole like SEO use case. And it's like you can very quickly dive into providing almost like consumer demand and consumer behavior data way faster than any traditional like marketing agency would be able to provide through doing like census groups and things like that. You can quickly kind of cluster together keywords that would define a given like category, be looking at the historical search volume of that. Granted, it is a challenge with the whole like clustering of keywords and search volume. But even with that, like we have so much ability to, I think, offer this like supplemental value to the other teams that then when you're going to have that conversation that you mentioned in the beginning of, hey, what's on your roadmap? This is where the intersection is. It makes those conversations so much easier when it's like you're willing to give that lending hand without the immediate payback or return from it.
Absolutely. And I think that's the truth of life, isn't it? Like you're always going to get more if you are a giver rather than a taker. One of my favorite authors, Adam Grant, he's an organizational psychologist, I believe at Harvard or Stanford, one of those. he has a great book. I'm forgetting what it's called, but it might be called Give and Take. And he goes through story after story and industry after industry and example after example of how being a giver is a really great way to have outsized performance. And I think the only way to be a giver is to understand what matters to that other person. So you aren't giving them something that they don't want, because at that point you're just taking their time. So it's something I reflect on often of how can I give more to whoever I'm speaking with rather than take more. And when you live your life that way, A, it's very liberating, and B, you don't feel like you're always keeping score, and you can really get a lot more out of it and build deeper relationships and get more stuff done and show better results, and that's what it's all about.
100%. And even within the industry, it's like we're still a relatively small, close-knit, community, I think, in SEO. And it's one
Absolutely.
of the things that I really like is that for the most part, there's still I think a genuine goodwill, and there's a lot of sharing of what's working, what's not working. It's like we all fell into this industry from one place or another. None of us went to school to be an SEO. And so I think that human element at the end of the day, regardless of what's going on with the landscape that we're competing in, at the end of the day, there's still a human element to it. And it's to me, a lot of these things are just more of human nature, general best practices of life,
Yes.
beyond SEO or the industry itself.
Yeah, one of my most recent talks at MozCon and Brighton SEO, one of the sections is about AI is going to know more than you, but you can care more than AI. And that's the human element here. That's how you AI proof your job, your career, is you care more. So yeah, good mantra to live by.
Nice. Well, with that, we're going to roll into kind of the lightning round of the conversation. And so I'm going to kind of throw out 5 different questions to you, and we'll just kind of crank right through them. So first one is going to be future forecasts. In one word, how do you see AI fundamentally reshaping how people search online over the next 12 months?
Simplifying.
Double down or ditch? Should SEO teams embrace CRO as a core part of our work and function, or should we stay in our own lane?
It should absolutely be integrated as a core part in every roadmap and in every initiative, from what content topic should we go after to how do we take their UX research and blend that into SEO strategy with keyword mapping. So yes, I'm going to say double down. CRO should be a part of SEO.
Couldn't agree more on that one. And I feel like if you really look at it, it's what lane is SEO? All of our work is in some sort of other area. So might as well embrace it and just lean into it. So next one, KPI face-off. What do you consider to be the big 3 KPIs that all SEO teams should report on?
Number 1 is revenue and conversions. Number 2 is share of voice, and not just organic share of voice, but I think search share of voice, incorporating paid search visibility, SEO visibility, and if you can, AI, search engine visibility. And then last but not least is brand searches, brand visibility, some KPI in that realm that shows how is the brand trending over time. And I have found when we focus on those KPIs to senior level executives, you're speaking a language that they care about, that they understand, and that they can ultimately use when they are presenting to board meetings or investors or anything like that.
I like that you threw in the brand voice component. Like, I feel like that's probably out of the three, the one that more people would kind of leave out or maybe not like embrace as much. So I like that call out there. Next one, trend or trash. Backlinking will have a resurgence with AI search.
To be honest, the word resurgence is throwing me off. I don't know if it ever really went away. I think backlinking will continue to play an important role, but I think brand mentions will play an even bigger role. And I think the technology is getting to a point to where it is better able to parse through information and understand how a brand is being spoken about on which websites, by which audiences and users, and that is going to matter more than the old school, oh, this was linked to a website. So all that to say, I think brand mentions, digital PR, etc., will still play an important role in the world of AI search.
Totally agree. I think it's like, yeah, maybe resurgence isn't the best word choice in there, but I feel like, in the last 5 years, it hasn't been a cornerstone in conversations, I think, as much. And I really like the more of the phrasing that you use there of digital PR. Like, I feel like the pendulum swing is like coming back towards that, and it's like we're having this, like, I don't know, a little more energy into that side of things, and it's less, I don't know, maybe spammy as it's been kind of manipulated a little bit into. So I'm excited to kind of see how that develops. All right, so last one, first 90 days. You're stepping into a new role as an SEO director at a brand that's been having declining traffic and poor conversions. What are your initial steps to win buy-in from upper management?
I think step number one is to diagnose the problem. You mentioned declining revenue. I think this is where CRO can and should play a really crucial part, because you can show results very quickly with CRO and launch a bunch of tests, audit the checkout flow, etc., to immediately at least stop declining revenue. And then from there, diagnosing what is declining, why is traffic declining. Step number two is focus on the systems and the process rather than the individual SEO silo. If you're at a brand with declining traffic and revenue, it's likely the case that the system or the process is broken, not just the channel. The only time I would disagree is if like a site was hit by a big algorithm update or something like that, and then that point is moot. But most of the time, it's process oriented, and so you want to set those expectations up front to say, hey, what I'm going to find might be we have a huge backlog on the development team, or the content that has been produced is riddled with errors, and so we have poor double eat in the eyes of Google, etc. Right? And when you set that expectation up front, you're going to immediately get the stakeholder buy-in without them being like, you need to be the one to solve this, and instead saying, I'm going to need your help to solve all of these things together. And when you focus on the system and process as opposed to the individuals, it really depersonalizes a lot of things and makes people far less defensive than if you say, this one person is the one screwing it up. And then last but not least, creating a very clear, 90-day roadmap of when they can expect audits, when they can expect results, when they can expect baseline reporting, new reporting, aligning KPIs, etc. I know that sounds like a lot for an SEO director to own as opposed to like a marketing director, but again, we have access to this data, we have access to information that is really valuable. And I think the best SEO directors out there really build a culture of SEO advocacy. and build a culture that is aligned with the business and not just the SEO work itself.
Couldn't agree more. And I feel like one thing I appreciate that has come throughout this conversation is I feel like your approach to the work and to SEO is you feel that underlining human element. And so I really appreciate kind of like that embrace to it, not in just kind of how you look at it, but also how it feels that you're strategizing, navigating the corporate environment. And I feel like that's something that I'd really encourage like the listeners also to embrace and bring it into their day-to-day. That wraps up this episode of the Voice of Search podcast. Thanks again to Travis Tallent from Brainlabs for joining us. And if you'd like to get in touch with Travis, you can find a link to his LinkedIn profile in their show notes, or be sure to go over and check out his company's website at brainlabsdigital.com. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe yet and you'd like a daily stream of SEO and content marketing in your app feed, be sure to hit that subscribe button in your podcast app or subscribe and like on YouTube, and we'll be back in your feed in the following day. So that's all for today. Thanks for checking out the Voice of Search podcast, and we'll see you in the next episode.